attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger. And yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war, before it imposes the self-discipline of combat conditions, then I can only say that no war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear, and its presence has never been more imminent. It requires a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions by the government, by the people, by every businessman or labor leader, and by every newspaper. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match. Nevertheless, every democracy recognizes the necessary restraints of national security. And the question remains whether those restraints need to be more strictly observed if we are to oppose this kind of attack as well as outright invasion. For the facts of the matter are that this nation's foes have openly boasted of acquiring through our newspapers information they would otherwise hire agents to acquire through theft, bribery, or espionage. That details of this nation's covert preparations to counter the enemy's covert operations have been available to every newspaper reader, friend and foe alike. That the size, the strength, the location, and the nature of our forces and weapons, and our plans and strategy for their use, have all been pinpointed in the press and other news media to a degree sufficient to satisfy any foreign power, and that in at least one case, the publication of details concerning a secret mechanism whereby satellites were followed required its alteration at the expense of considerable time and money. The newspapers which printed these stories were loyal, patriotic, responsible, and well-meaning. Had we been engaged in open warfare, they undoubtedly would not have published such items. But in the absence of open warfare, they recognized only the tests of journalism and not the tests of national security. And my question tonight is whether additional tests should not now be adopted. That question is for you alone to answer. No public official should answer it for you. No governmental plan should impose its restraints against your will. But I would be failing in my duty to the nation in considering all of the responsibilities that we now bear and all of the means at hand to meet those responsibilities if I did not commend this problem to your attention and urge its thoughtful consideration. On many earlier occasions I have said, and your newspapers have constantly said, that these are times that appeal to every citizen's sense of sacrifice and self-discipline. They call out to every citizen to weigh his rights and comforts against his obligations to the common good. I cannot now believe that those citizens who serve in the newspaper business consider themselves exempt from that appeal. I have no intention of establishing a new Office of War Information to govern the flow of news. I am not suggesting any new forms of censorship or new types of security classifications. I have no easy answer to the dilemma that I have posed, and would not seek to impose it if I had one. But I am asking the members of the newspaper profession and the industry in this country to re-examine their own responsibilities, to consider the degree and the nature of the present danger, and to heed the duty of self-restraint, which that danger imposes upon us all. Every newspaper now asks itself, with respect to every story, is it news? All I suggest is that you add the question, is it in the interest of national security? And I hope that every group in America, unions and businessmen and public officials at every level, will ask the same question of their endeavors and subject their actions to this same exacting test. And should the press of America consider and recommend the voluntary assumption of specific new steps or machinery, I can assure you that we will cooperate wholeheartedly with those recommendations. Perhaps there will be no recommendations. Perhaps there is no answer to the dilemma faced by a free and open society in a cold and secret war. In times of peace, any discussion of this subject and any action that results are both painful and without precedent. But this is a time of peace and peril which knows no precedent in history. It is the unprecedented nature of this challenge that also gives rise to your second obligation, an obligation which I share, and that is our obligation to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security, and we intend to do it. It was early in the 17th century that Francis Bacon remarked on three recent inventions already transforming the world: the compass, gunpowder, and the printing press. Now the links between the nations, first forged by the compass, have made us all citizens of the world, the hopes and threats of one becoming the hopes and threats of us all. In that one world's effort to live together, The evolution of gunpowder to its ultimate limit has warned mankind of the terrible consequences of failure. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
David Dorn is not a name on the lips of our leaders this week. Should be. Dorn served his community for almost 40 years as a police officer. Even after he retired, he continued to help others. Last weekend, Dorn was in St. Louis trying to protect a friend's store from looters, and he was murdered for doing it. This country ought to remember Dorn, who represents the best of America. Instead, his name has been shoved down the memory hole. The media would like him forgotten immediately so they can go back to inflaming hateful violence across our nation. We should not let that happen. He was not the only victim, by the way, of these riots, and not the only victim who has been forgotten. We think that's a shame. On Twitter, former White House speechwriter Darren Beattie, and good for him, has been keeping track of the casualties of this rioting, and we want to read some of them to you because it's important to remember people who've been killed. More than just one, many. David Patrick Underwood was a Federal Protective Service officer in California. A week ago, he was shot to death. We don't know who killed him. He was protecting a federal building in Oakland. One of his colleagues was also critically injured in that shooting. Natalia Marie Kelly was just 22 years old. She was attending a George Floyd-related protest in Davenport, Iowa. She became uncomfortable with the direction of that protest, understandably. She got in her car to leave, and she was killed by a stray bullet, shot dead. Jose Gutierrez was a bystander. He was watching as others looted the Chicago suburb of Cicero. For being there, he was shot in the head and killed by this man, Zion Haygood. That's what police say. Another victim in Cicero, Illinois was Victor Cesares Jr. He was 27. He was shot to death outside a grocery store. No one remembers his name. We should. In Minneapolis, Francisco Montiel, who was 46, was found dead next to a burned-out car. Police attributed his death to, quote, complex homicidal violence. That's obvious. He was a casualty of the riots. At least 3 people were murdered during the violence in Indianapolis. One of them was 38-year-old former Indiana football player Chris Beatty. He was found shot to death just outside his apartment. An unnamed Latino man in his 20s was also killed on Sunday in Los Angeles in an area that was completely demolished by rioters. And of course, those are just the ones who were killed. Probably not an exhaustive list. If you know more, please send them to us. Thousands have been hurt, maimed, financially ruined, brain damaged over the past week. Dozens of those are police officers. They were injured trying to protect the public. One of them is Las Vegas police officer Shea McLanis. He was shot during a riot on Monday. The man who shot him says it was an accident. He was just trying to scare away rioters. We don't know the truth, but the man took a bullet to the head. The police officer did. Every one of those people deserves to be remembered. But instead, again, they are forgotten, and they're forgotten on purpose. The press would like these protests to go down in history as mostly peaceful. They're not, and they're not in part because CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, and many others have been inflaming racial tensions around the country. They're inciting violence. They don't care about the consequences. The rest of us should care. Those are human beings, they're Americans, and now they're gone. And you know who did it? The people on our streets. They should be held accountable for what they did.
At riots in New York City, one radical was arrested for attempted murder of police officers after throwing a Molotov cocktail into an occupied police car. No lives were lost and no serious injuries were reported, luckily. NTD's Kevin Hogan was on the scene.
Rioters terrorized the streets of New York City on Saturday in the wake of the death of George Floyd. In Manhattan, agitators smashed windows and looted stores. Violent protesters set at least 3 police vehicles ablaze.
We had Molotov cocktails recovered. We had an arrest effected for attempted murder of 4 police officers by an individual throwing a Molotov cocktail into an occupied, marked police van.
Protesters marched the streets chanting, while some started fires and destroyed private property. Along the route, they came across a cache with neatly stacked bricks and shovels. 4 protesters wearing all black clothing and backpacks converged on the supplies and worked together to peel back the fencing.
But you stood up and indicated that you are a paid protester. What did you mean by that?
Well, I meant, you know, like, we all get paid you know.
No, I don't know. Please explain.
Well, it's a difficult thing to explain, but basically, anytime that you're given the opportunity to protest and somebody will pay you to do it, that's like twice as good as just doing it on your own time.
So you weren't kidding around. You actually meant that you have been paid
like,
at some point to protest?
Yeah, like
How can I get in on that?
Yeah, okay, so, you know, go to, like, GeorgeSoros.com, and, you just sign up right there. You put your name in, you put your email address, and there's an empty box there where you say, how many times you're willing to protest and how much you want to get paid.
And you get a check directly from Soros.
Directly from Soros.
That's incredible.
Signed by him. He even invited me to lunch.
Does he sign it in blood?
He said if I'm willing to, like, gather some more
Fair
friends,
question.
I can get paid like twice as much for every friend that I gather, and kind of set up a pyramid scheme.
And you can get rich just based on protesting for Soros, right?
I already have, yeah.
Of all the financial titans and philanthropists of the 20th century, none are more complex or mysterious than George Soros. Like Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and the Rockefellers, he amassed billions through ruthless business decisions, only to turn around and give away most of his fortune to advance his own personal philosophy. He can move world financial markets simply by voicing an opinion, or destabilize a government by buying and selling its currency. He also pledged more aid last year to help people in Russia than the U.S. government did. But now George Soros is worried. He thinks the global economy is coming apart at the seams, and that the world needs to be protected from people like George Soros.
We may now think that everything is fine, but the fact is that the system is broke and it needs fixing.
What you're doing is asking some form of regulation to protect the world against you.
Well, I'm a player, and I think all players should be regulated. There have to be rules of the game.
48,000, 69,000 YUM.
Right now, his Quantum Group hedge fund moves $14 billion of rich investors' money around the world every day, looking for profits and answering to no one. Soros makes huge bets on whole countries and economies. Last year, when he saw cracks in the Asia boom, he began selling the currency in Thailand. Traders in Hong Kong followed suit, triggering a financial crisis that plunged much of Asia into a depression.
In the last 2 years, you've been blamed for financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia.
All of the above.
All of the above. Are you that powerful?
No, I think there's a great misunderstanding.
The Prime Minister of Malaysia said that the region spent 40 years trying to build up its economy, and along comes a moron like Soros with a lot of money, and it's all over. He called you a criminal.
It's easier for him to blame an outside force than to admit that they were mismanaging their economy and their currency. The French finance minister talked about hanging speculators from lampposts.
Soros says the Asian currencies would have collapsed even if he hadn't been in the market. They were overvalued. He says people tend to follow his lead because he's been so successful.
I think that I've been blamed for everything. I am basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do.
To understand the complexities and contradictions in his personality, you have to go back to the very beginning, to Budapest, where George Soros was born 68 years ago to parents who were wealthy, well-educated, and Jewish.
When the Nazis occupied Budapest in 1944, George Soros' father was a successful lawyer. He lived on an island in the Danube and liked to commute to work in a rowboat. But knowing there were problems ahead for the Jews, he decided to split his family up. He bought them forged papers, and he bribed a government official to take 14-year-old George Soros in and swear that he was his Christian godson. But survival carried a heavy price tag. While hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were being shipped off to the death camps, George Soros accompanied his phony godfather on his appointed rounds, confiscating property from the Jews.
These are pictures from 1944 of what happened to George Soros's friends and neighbors.
You're a Hungarian Jew who escaped the Holocaust by posing as a Christian.
Right.
And you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps.
Right. I was 14 years old. And I would say that that's when my character was made.
In what way?
That one should think ahead, one should understand and anticipate events, and one is threatened. It was a tremendous threat of evil. I mean, it was a very personal experience of evil.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection, but it created no problem at all.
No feeling of guilt.
No.
For example, that I'm Jewish, and here I am watching these people go. I could just as easily be there. I should be there. None of that.
Well, of course, I could be on the other side, or I could be the one from whom the thing is being taken away. But there was no sense that I shouldn't be there, because that was, well, actually, funny way, it's just like in markets, that if I weren't there, of course I wasn't doing it, but somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. In other words, whether I was there or not, I was only a spectator. The property was being taken away. So I had no role in taking away that property. So I had no sense of guilt.
Are you religious?
No.
Do you believe in God?
No. Actually, probably the happiest year of my life, that year of German occupation. For me, it was a very positive experience. It's a strange thing, because you see incredible suffering around you, and in fact, you are in considerable danger yourself. But you're 14 years old and you don't believe that it can actually touch you. You have a belief in yourself, you belief in your father. It's a very happy-making, exhilarating experience.
Happy-making, exhilarating experience.
The man who broke the Bank of England.
The name George Soros crops up in the news a lot. He's called Brexit an immensely damaging process and has given about £800,000 to pro-Remain group Best for Britain, helping to launch their campaign for a second referendum on EU membership.
George Soros has funded an app to help illegal immigrants avoid federal immigration authorities. The group is called United We Dream, founded by an organization receiving more than $200,000 as well in federal grant money. Your taxpayer dollars at work. Joining us now, Chris Farrell, Director of Investigations Research for Judicial Watch, which brought the story to light. That's outrageous. Soros getting involved, federal money being used for it. What's happening as a result? Is there somebody being prosecuted?
It's also a crime. 8 U.S.C. Section 1327, which is aiding and abetting the unlawful entry of persons into the United States. This app is pretty outrageous. Not only does it allow the unlawful, illegal alien to have all the magic language they need to plead their case, but it provides notice to their friends and family. It alerts their attorney. It's a full service.
Got it.
Yeah,
Why
it's
isn't somebody
outrageous.
being prosecuted?
He was also falsely linked to the March for Our Lives movement, following the Parkland shooting in Florida. As well as to the Central American migrant caravan heading to Mexico and the US.
Black Lives Matter is now being sued by a black Dallas police officer. Sergeant Demetric Penny claims Black Lives Matter and their supporters have incited a, quote, race war and violence against police. Al Sharpton, George Soros, President Obama, and Hillary Clinton all named in that lawsuit. The 5 Dallas officers were killed during an ambush at the end of a Black Lives Matter protest back in July.
Black Lives Matter is a decentralized network regrouping local chapters. Its members come from all communities, but critics say it encourages a confrontational approach towards authorities. When a gunman shot 5 police officers in Dallas last week, saying he was, quote, upset about Black Lives Matter, some said the killings were the network's fault. But quickly authorities pledged to keep protecting the group.
Those who seek to improve our country through peaceful protest and protected speech, I want you to know that your voice is important.
The overwhelming majority of people who are involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, what they really want to see is a better relationship between the police and the community.
The group got support from various artists. One of the latest backings comes from Facebook, which has put up a huge banner with the organization's name on its main headquarters.
In their midst was a sometimes very violent group of protesters that call themselves Antifa, known to not only clash with bigots, but also sometimes with police and occasionally storefronts. At least 2 journalists in Virginia were assaulted by violent counter-protesters over the weekend, including this cameraman from the Richmond CBS affiliate. CNN's Sarah Gannon now takes us inside Antifa and shows us this group like you've never seen it before.
We are meeting members of the Grove City Antifa, short for anti-fascist. This group's main goal is to disrupt neo-Nazis and white supremacists, but also take on government and capitalism.
Antifa is any group that's willing to stand up against fascists by any means necessary.
By any means necessary, they say, can mean outing a white nationalist at their work or to their neighbors. Or, as we've seen recently, violence, fires, property damage, hand-to-hand combat at protests across the country.
Black lives matter, white lives matter, all lives matter.
Saying all lives matter was seen as offensive, and O'Malley later apologized.
That was a mistake on my part, and I meant no disrespect, and I did not mean to be insensitive in any way.
Marissa Johnson is a co-founder of Seattle's Black Lives Matter. We talked to her in 2016.
All lives matter is a new racial slur.
Explain for our viewers why it's a racial slur.
And the reality is that white Americans have created the conditions that require a phrase like Black Lives Matter. Do you know what I would give to live in a world where I didn't have to say Black Lives Matter? Do you know how horrific it is to grow up as a child in a world that so hates you?
No, I don't.
That you have to literally say to other people, my life matters. And they're like, well, everybody's lives matter. While you're literally being gunned down in the street, while you're being rounded up and mass incarcerated and forced into prison slavery. Black Lives Matter is not a strong enough statement for me, right?
Thank you, Seattle, for being one of the most progressive cities in the United States of America.
Marissa's group showed up at a Bernie Sanders event in Seattle in August 2015.
You need to let me speak or I will shut it down. Get out of my face.
The crowd didn't like it.
I was gonna tell Bernie how racist this city is, filled with its progressives, but you already did it for me. Thank you.
What it's going to take to dismantle white supremacy is white folks actually got to give up something. You have to actually sacrifice yourself. You have to be willing to give up the things that you currently benefit from. The anger of Black Lives Matter exploded in July 2016 after a protest in Dallas. Micah Xavier Johnson ambushed Dallas police officers, killing 5 of them. Police said Johnson was upset about Black Lives Matter and recent police shootings in Louisiana and Minnesota and wanted to kill white people.
I watched you, talking on a bunch of different interviews today, and you said, burn it down. You said, burn it down. It's time. So that makes me think that you want to burn it down.
I said, if this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down this system and replace it. All right, and I could be speaking figuratively.
Okay.
I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation.
As their city crumbled around them, local leaders huddled in deliberation. They emerged with a plan. They declared that racism is, quote, a national emergency. CNN immediately trumpeted the development as if it were breaking news. Meanwhile, mobs in downtown Minneapolis kept looting, stores kept burning. Normal people of all colors huddled indoors, terrified. No one bothered to explain how any of this was connected. How exactly does racism have anything to do with looting ATM machines or stealing PlayStations from Target? It's confusing. What we do know is that riots are now acceptable because racism is a national emergency. That's the new standard. Okay, so now that we're in a state of national emergency, the question is, what is not acceptable? What's not okay? Anything? Here's what some of the, quote, protesters were chanting last night in Minneapolis. So you're not going to see that clip on CNN. How come? It's simple. Facts like this, and there are a lot of them, challenge the carefully constructed storyline that our leaders richly profit from. Therefore, those facts must be suppressed.
In Minnesota, chants from Black Lives Matter protesters are drawing disgust from police. The protesters took to the streets Saturday in St. Paul outside of the state fair, yelling, quote, pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon, end quote. Some believe the chant refers to putting police officers in body bags.
And it was the Antifa movement that caused Berkeley to cancel speeches by extreme right provocateurs like Milo Yiannopoulos.
If there are the more hardcore elements, the white supremacists and neo-Nazis that go to these rallies that are itching for a fight, we're there to say, we'll stand in your way.
Why are you trying to block me? I'm trying to walk here. You're a snarky little idiot. Shut up. Try something. I'm not gonna punch you. I'm not like your husband. I'm not gonna punch you. I'm not like your boyfriend or your talk boyfriend who's gonna knock you out, so don't worry. I'm not gonna touch you. Good for him. Good. Good. Those NYPD were a bunch of sodomizing immigrants with their bully sticks. So yeah, your husband probably rot in the grave.
You're also hitting and you're throwing things and you're reacting violently.
I think self-defense can look violent if you are looking at it as the person who responds in self-defense is as culpable, but we don't see it that way. We see ourselves as engaging in self-defense from groups who want to do our community harm, whose ideology is the ideology of genocide and mass murder. So, in the sense of reaction, we see fascism as an inherently violent ideology. So when we disrupt its organizing, we see that as self-defense.
The very presence of organizations and people who you would call fascist or fascist leaning, that very presence is violent, and so your violent reaction would be self-defense. Although ideologically that's what you believe, in reality, in the legal system, that would count as assault. Does that concern you at all?
One of our points of unity is that we don't depend on the cops or the courts to do the work of opposing white supremacy.
So you're saying that when far-right groups come here and throw demonstrations and have their rallies, they don't necessarily have to throw the first punch in order for you to react violently?
The purpose of these groups in coming to Portland is to attack people.
George Soros' critics see him as interfering in international affairs. He donated to both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And in the 1980s, he helped undermine Hungary's communist regime.
There was something wrong with the regime, so they were ripe to fall.
Much of Soros' global reach is through his charity, Open Society Foundations, which he's donated $32 billion to. He says he founded the charity to build vibrant and tolerant democracies.
There are certain things one has to fight for, even if it's not popular.
George Soros' campaign of support for refugees in Europe has caused quite a stir.
We've got enemies, Open Society and its enemies.
His own Hungarian government put their hostility towards him on display. Here, organisations supporting illegal immigration must now be registered. The name the government gave to this legislation? Stop Soros. Hungary's Prime Minister is one of Soros' fiercest critics. When the murder of a journalist in neighbouring Slovakia prompted anti-government protests there, this is how Viktor Orban responded.
És egy percig sincsen kétségem afelől, hogy Soros jött, és a vele együttműködők mindent megtesznek, minden alkalmat
doing this all around the world.
kormányokat, amelyek ellenállnak a bevándorlásnak, megbuktassák.
In 1970, he set up Soros Fund Management, but it was in the 1992 Black Wednesday crisis that George Soros earned his reputation as a ruthless financier. This came about when speculators put pressure on the pound, causing it to crash. Soros made about $1 billion by short-selling Britain's currency. The government lost about $5.5 billion, and the pound was forced out of the European exchange rate mechanism.
I did it in order to make a profit.
George Soros is a billionaire, but somehow his own money isn't enough to fund the totality of his anti-American agenda. So, U.S. taxpayers had to step into the breach and help as well, and they did. Department of Justice documents newly obtained by Judicial Watch, thank heaven, show that in 2016, the Obama administration, whose misdeeds are now just coming to light, gave almost $9 million to support something called the East-West Management Institute. That's a Soros-funded venture. According to Judicial Watch, the money did little other than empower the socialist government of Albania, which spends a lot of time making its people more miserable. Tom Fitton is the president of Judicial Watch, and he joins us tonight. One of the reasons I'm so glad that you're here, Tom, is because you kind of tie a bow on stories. The Obama administration's over, but there's a lot that they did that we don't know anything about because the press refused to cover those stories. Tell us this small piece of it. What did they do in Albania and why?
Well, they're supporting the socialist communist government there, the Soros operations, and they're doing it with taxpayer dollars. They were doing it in 2016, and they were even doing it in the first part of the Trump administration in 2017, co-sponsoring surveys of the population that generated 91% of the support in favor of the pro-government, pro-Soros operation that would have restricted the independence of the judiciary. Now, like all strongman governments, they don't like independent judiciaries, right. So they were trying to reform the judiciary in a way that would have brought it under control of the socialist government there. And what's troubling is that obviously Soros needs no taxpayer money to do any of this advocacy work, but the State Department and USAID is partnering with Soros and basically allowing Soros to set our foreign policy agenda. And then secondly, Soros's operations, according to these documents, were allowed to come into the State Department and provide technical reviews of other applications for other government money in Albania.
But, I mean, George Soros hates the United States, and I'm judging that by the projects that he funds, all of which are designed to change the country as it is now or to thwart U.S. interests. So why in the world would any State Department give money to a Soros-funded operation?
Well, it's not only in Albania. We have four lawsuits at one point. Albania, Romania, he's active in Hungary, Guatemala, Colombia. They're very, very active, and it doesn't take a lot of money to have a big impact in these countries. And the governments are under assault from the SOROS State Department unity effort to bring socialism and stop anything in the area of reform, constitutionalism, the sort of things that Americans would be comfortable with. The Soros groups aren't.
Billionaire George Soros' fund manages about $30 billion for Soros and his family. But the progressive-leaning Soros took nearly $1 billion in losses recently, thanks to the stock market rally spurred by Donald Trump's surprise presidential election. Soros returned to trading at his fund last year, lured back by the opportunities to profit from what he saw as coming economic troubles. The Wall Street Journal's Gregory Zuckerman and Juliet Chung report that Soros was cautious about the market going into November and became more bearish immediately after Trump's election. The stance proved to be a mistake, as the stock market has rallied on expectation that Trump's policies will boost corporate earnings and the overall economy. Over the past 3 months, the S&P 500 index has increased by more than 6%. As a result, some of Soros' trading positions incurred losses approaching $1 billion. People familiar with the fund say, adding that he adjusted his positions and exited many of his bearish bets late last year, avoiding further losses. That said, Soros' broader portfolio performed better, bringing in profits before and after the election from long-held investments in sectors including financials and industrials, they say. Those gains helped Soros Fund Management gain about 5% on the year, but Mr. Trump's election has spurred huge profits for others. One clear example is Stanley Druckenmiller, Soros' former deputy, who helped Soros score $1 billion in profit betting against the British pound in 1992. Sources say Druckenmiller anticipated the market's recent climb and racked up sizable gains. Druckenmiller left Soros' firm in 2000 and now invests his own money, taking a different stance on the presidential election. Days before the election, he predicted that if Hillary Clinton emerged victorious, the stock market would likely rally initially but then fall, and the opposite effect in the case of a Trump win. These trades have paid off, as Druckenmiller's firm has scored gains of more than 10% in 2016.
Yes, I'm angry. Yes, I am outraged. Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
Ashley Judd is here!
I am a feminist. And I want to say hello to Independence Avenue in the back, all the way down to 17th Street.
Wow!
And I bring you words from Nina Donovan, a 19-year-old in Middle Tennessee, and she has given me the privilege of telling you what she has to say. I am a nasty woman. I'm not as nasty as a man who looks like he bathes in Cheeto dust. A man whose words are a diss track to America. Welcome to the revolution of love. To the rebellion. To our refusal as women to accept this new age of tyranny, where not just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It took this horrific moment of darkness to wake us the up.
There is no escaping the clear and present danger of white supremacist violence in the United States and the terrible urgency to confront it. Simply put, it's domestic terrorism. Acts of unspeakable violence motivated by a hateful ideology which justifies them as a means to an end.
Smollett has been charged with disorderly conduct for filing a false police report, which is a felony in the state of Illinois. Dean Reynolds has covered this investigation since it began last month.
Police in Chicago say Smollett lied to them last month when he claimed two masked Trump supporters shouting racist and homophobic slurs beat him up in the middle of the night near his apartment building. Smollett last spoke on national TV before suspicion turned to him.
I still want to believe, with everything that has happened, that there's something called justice.
Two of Smollett's acquaintances, Ola and Abel Osundairo, told investigators the actor directed and paid them to stage that attack. Gloria Schmidt is their attorney.
There was a point where this story needed to be told, and they manned up and they said, you know what, we're going to correct this.
The men are cooperating with police and have not been charged. Schmidt says they testified before a grand jury for about 2.5 hours Wednesday. This surveillance video, obtained by CBS Chicago station WBBM, shows the Osundairo brothers buying a red cap, gloves, and a ski mask the day before Smollett claims he was assaulted.
I think he should unload that conscience and just come out and tell the American people what actually happened.
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
My concern right now are those, the black elitists, the royalty black class, that live the life of America. They have the great homes, the great education, and yet they tell other black Americans they can't do it. This to me is where the problem is. I call them the parasites because they suck the very heart and soul and hopes out of our black communities and leave nothing behind as they move on and live the American dream. So black America, conservative Americans will coming to the aid. We're going to be there to make sure that our kids, these young men who become successful, understand what they do, how to give back and not take from our communities.
What's the reaction to you as a black man saying this kind of thing? Because all I hear is liberals amongst the black community making their point. How do they react to you when you make your point?
What I love, Stuart, is that I'm finding out that there are many black Americans who feel exactly the same way I do. I can care less about those who don't really care, those who are not educating themselves. There's a small minority of black Americans, 30% of us, who believe in the American dream, believe in our country. We need just a few of us to pull back those who are concerned about our community from the Democratic Party, and we will win. So I'm excited about where we are now. We're having the kind of conversation we should be having. At the end of the day, we have a royalty black class that is truly our enemy, and those are the ones that continue to divide and call other people with no shame racist.
This is a president who has, I mean, we don't even need to, the sad thing about this is it's no longer really a debatable point. There is just a long list of statements and tweets and behaviors from this president that make it very clear that he possesses hate, and that he is divisive, and that he is a racist.
I think non-African Americans think African Americans are all the same.
The debate over law enforcement's use of facial recognition technology. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib making clear today where she stands with a tweet urging Detroit police not to use it.
But DPD quickly responded, inviting Tlaib to come see how it works and how it's used in their real-time crime center.
Today, Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib added her thoughts. In a tweet, she said, "Detroit police, you should probably rethink this whole facial recognition expletive."
Oh, I don't know. I'm not. You know what? And also, analysts need to be African Americans, not people that are not. Because let me tell you, no, this happens all the time. It's true. I mean, I think non-African Americans think African Americans are all the same. I've seen it even on the House floor, people calling Elijah Cummings John Lewis and John Lewis Elijah Cummings, and they're totally different people.
I trust people who are trained.
I know.
Regardless of race, regardless of gender.
Yeah.
It's about the training.
But it does make a huge difference.
The fact that she made that statement, what does that say to the members of this department who are analysts, who are trained, who are white, that they in some way can't do their job professionally? That's insulting. If I had made a similar comment, people would be outraged. They'd be calling for our resignation.
You are looking at Detroit police facial recognition software. This is an individual the department identified as wanted in a felony crime through the controversial technology.
Well, the facial recognition technology, or called software, is racist.
But here's what's troubling. As a police chief who happened to be African American in this city, if I made a similar statement, people would be calling for my resignation right now. We know that. So is it a double standard?
Well, late last week, the mayor of Oakland, California, Libby Schaaf, who tonight is in the running for the worst and most incompetent mayor in the United States, promised a hate crime prosecution after what she described as nooses were discovered in a public park. After a brief investigation by the local TV station revealed they weren't nooses. They were in fact just ropes with loops at the end. They were put up by local residents for exercise.
Out of the dozens and hundreds and thousands of people that have walked by, no one, has thought that it looked anywhere close to a noose. Right? Folks have used it for exercise. Folks have, it was really a fun addition to the park.
Yeah. Thousands of people walked by. None of them thought it was a noose because none of them was half as hysterical as Libby Schaaf or half as political. It's kind of an amusing story, really, but it should have caused the rest of us to pause and reflect for a minute. Every few months, there appears to be new hysteria over nooses discovered somewhere, often in a public place, and almost inevitably, the hate crime we're warned about turns out to be fake. When a noose was found in Bubba Wallace's garage, everyone instantly assumed, in the media anyway, it was a real hate crime. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who wants to be the Republican nominee next time, and wants you to believe she's conservative, tweeted this, quote, "We should all stand with Bubba Wallace today against the cowards who secretly put the noose in his garage stall. Watch your back, cowards. Bubba has a bigger army than you do. Hashtag hate won't win." Nikki Haley believed it immediately and used it to make the point Nikki Haley often makes, which is America's a very racist country. Remember that. NASCAR President Steve Phelps, meanwhile, immediately vowed to ban the perpetrator for life. Then the Atlantic's Jamel Hill used the incident to tar millions of NASCAR fans as racists.
This reminder, this very stunning, shocking, appalling, disgusting reminder of who, again, this sport is for. I'm very curious as to see how NASCAR handles this, because based off what everything I've read, is that this had to be an inside job, because this garage was only open to essential personnel. So somebody associated with NASCAR likely may have been the culprit.
From the beginning, there were a few who expressed public skepticism. Might this be a misunderstanding? Bubba Wallace, who never produced pictures of the noose, had a message for anyone who questioned his story. They were stupid and they were racist.
What would you say to those people who are doubting that this even happened or that it's true?
Yeah, just like Steve Phelps said, it offends me that people would go to those measures. But again, I'm not shocked. It's simple-minded people like that, the ones that are afraid of change. They use everything in their power to defend what they stand up for, and instead of trying to listen and understand.
Well, the FBI bought the story completely. They've done nothing to arrest the people who are burning police stations or tearing down monuments of George Washington. But the FBI sent 15 agents to Alabama to investigate the noose. And after days of investigation, they discovered the noose was in fact a rope with a loop used by work crews to pull down a garage door. One of these nooses was present in every garage at Talladega. Once again, authorities rushed in to believe an absurd story because it could be used to advance a political agenda.
The goal is to tell black people that we're victims, that discrimination and racism remain major problems in America when in fact they don't. And they want black people to vote for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party gets 95% of the black vote. And the reason they get it is because blacks are convinced that the #1 issue facing the country right now is social justice, racist white cops, discrimination, systemic racism, microaggression, whatever new word they come up with, and it's a bunch of nonsense. The #1 problem domestically facing this country is a breakdown of the family. And President Obama said it, I didn't. A black kid, or kid, not just a black kid, a kid raised without a dad, is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crimes, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. So you're far more likely to end up in jail without having a dad than you are because of a white racist cop.
Right. So, but you wouldn't not acknowledge that there are some systemic issues.
Give me an example. Tell me what you think the most systemic racist issue is. What is it?
Well, I would say that because black people, in most cases, in many cases, were descendants of slaves, that racism as an institution, that it just, a certain amount of it just exists.
2015? Give me the most blatant racist example you can come up with right now.
I think you could probably find evidence that, in general, cops are more willing to shoot if the perpetrator is black.
What's your data?
Than white.
What's your basis for saying that? Last year.
Well, look, I know a lot of people would say, "Look what's going on in Chicago."
I know what they would say.
Yeah.
I'm talking about what the facts are. 965 people were shot by cops last year and killed. 4% of them were white cops shooting unarmed blacks. In Chicago in 2011, 21 people were shot and killed by cops. In 2015, there were 7. In Chicago, which is a third black, a third white, and a third Hispanic, 70% of the homicides are black on black. About 40 per month, almost 500 per year last year in Chicago, and 75% of them are unsolved. Where's the Black Lives Matter on that? The idea that a racist white cop shooting unarmed black people is a peril to black people is BS. It's complete and total BS. And the reason for these so-called activists saying this is the assumption that racism remains a major problem in America. The media, CNN, especially MSNBC, runs down whenever a black cop shoots somebody, and it's some march on Washington. It's ridiculous. Black people, half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year there were 14,000 homicides. I'm not talking about suicides, I'm talking about homicides. Half of them were black, 96% of them black on black of that 7,000. Where's the Black Lives Matter people on that?
The Washington Post said, Carson's insistence that racial matters amount almost to nuisance thoughts and pointless exercise and distractions can sound like deep denial and worse, like a willful effort to blame black America for its own.
Well, that's their interpretation or the narrative that they want to put out. You know, and in no way have I said the things that they say. But what I have said is let's put the emphasis in the right place. You know, when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, let's find the solutions. Yes, we all agree that Black Lives Matter, but we're not going to get anywhere by sitting there pointing fingers
What
at
do you
each
think
other.
what happened to Bernie Sanders the other night? That he was shouted down with the Black Lives Matter crowd, and he was unable to speak.
Well, you know, there are too many people fighting for attention here. But again...
Would you have stayed there if you were shouted down?
I don't know. I really don't know. It depends on what the circumstances were, what the security arrangements were, etc.
So when you hear Black Lives Matter, Doctor, how do you answer that? Because other candidates have said all lives matter.
Well, I would say for a young black male in a major city in America, the #1 cause of death is homicide. And the vast majority of those homicides are occurring at the hands of other black males. And you look at the number of black babies that are being aborted. Do those lives matter? I think they matter a lot. So, you know, we need to be looking at the whole spectrum of how do we save those lives, and more importantly, how do we improve the quality of those lives, because we only have 330 million people in this country. China and India have 1 billion. We have to compete with them. We have to develop all of our lives, every single one of them.
Joy, thank you very much for having me on this morning and continuing this discussion about the racism that is being led by the President of the United States of America. His Republican colleagues know that he's a racist.
For those of us who are policymakers, it is our job to acknowledge the problem and its historic roots. That is why myself and my colleagues on a federal level are introducing a resolution that acknowledges the systematic targeting of and use of deadly and brutal force against black people and people of color.
Thank you to my sisters in service. Thank you all so much for being here. As we all know, the recent tweets and words from the president are simply a continuation of his racist and xenophobic playbook.
The curfew has the assumption that you're safe inside of your house. And for many that may be the case, but for the people that live in this area the past 4 nights, our fear has been, are we going to be burnt down? inside of our buildings while we leave. We're tired of explaining to our children what's going on outside. And last night, many people in this building had to evacuate in the middle of the night. What is there some guarantees for us that if we remain in our house, that we will not be burnt alive?
So you definitely would agree that he's a racist?
I do, yes, yes.
Every single member of this institution, Democratic and Republican, to join us in condemning the president's racist tweets. To do anything less would be a shocking rejection of our values and a shameful abdication of our oath of office to protect the American people. I urge a unanimous vote and yield back the balance of my...
I was just going to give the General Speaker of the House if she would like to rephrase that comment.
I have cleared my remarks as a parliamentarian before I read them.
You take it. And I ask the words be taken down. I make a point of order the gentlewoman's words are unparliamentary and are ready to be taken down.
The chair will remind all members, please do not make comments toward personality-based comments.
It is deeply problematic to meet this moment with a menial, incremental approach that offers more funding to police and few policies to effectively address the constant loss of black lives at the hands of police. Who do you believe, America? Civil Rights Conference or Mitch McConnell? Who do you believe, America? NAACP or the Republican caucus? Who do you believe, America? The lawyer for the Taylor and Floyd families or Donald Trump, who has these members quaking in their boots that they do something that he doesn't like? That's one of the other reasons we're in such a pickle here. They are so afraid of Donald Trump, who's willing to say overtly racist statements.
I think the reason that the organizers used the phrase Black Lives Matters was not because they said they were suggesting nobody else's lives matter. Rather, what they were suggesting was there is a specific problem that is happening in the African American community that's not happening in other communities. And that is a legitimate issue that we've got to address. We as a society, particularly given our history, have to take this seriously. And one of the ways of avoiding the politics of this and losing the moment is everybody just stepping back for a second and understanding that the African American community is not just making this up. And it's not just something being politicized. It's real.
First of all, it was the Minneapolis police who were the ones who were accused of mistreating protesters, but like a knife through butter. It is a strange way to talk about the American military troops on the streets of an American city. He seems to almost be sort of glorifying and just the idea and just sort of imagining violence. It is odd. What do you make of it?
Well, he does glorify violence, and I think from the beginning of these peaceful protests, he's really trying to egg on this kind of violence in the streets, egg on a more militaristic response by police, calling in troops.
A senior administration official told our CBS's David Martin that in a meeting at the White House on Monday morning, the president demanded that 10,000 active duty troops be ordered into American streets. Is that accurate?
No, that's completely false. That's completely false. Sunday night...
The president did not demand that?
No, he did not demand that.
What happened?
I came over on Monday morning for a meeting. The night before had been the most violent day, as one of the police officials told us, the D.C. police. It was the most violent day in Washington in 30 years, something that the media has not done a very good job of covering. And there had been a riot right along Lafayette Park. I was called over and asked if I would coordinate federal civil agencies and that the Defense Department would provide whatever support I needed or we needed to protect federal property, the White House, federal personnel. The decision was made to have at the ready and on hand in the vicinity some regular troops. But everyone agreed that the use of regular troops is a last resort, and that as long as matters can be controlled with other resources, they should be. I felt, and the Secretary of Defense felt, he had adequate resources and wouldn't need to use federal troops. But in case we did, we wanted them nearby. There was never, the President never asked or suggested that we needed to deploy regular troops at that point.
What part of that conversation, as it's been relayed to CBS and to other news organizations, is false? Did the President not demand active duty troops?
Well, your question to me just a moment ago was, did he demand them on the streets? Did he demand them in D.C.? No, we had them on standby in case they were needed.
Right. Do you think that the President has the authority to unilaterally send in active duty troops if the governors oppose it?
Oh, absolutely. Under the Anti-Insurrection Act, the President can use regular troops to suppress rioting. The Confederacy in our country opposed the use of federal troops to restore order and suppress an insurrection. So the federal government sometimes doesn't listen to governors in circumstances.
The last time that this has happened was the LA riots in 1992, when the governor of California asked for active duty troops.
That's
You're
right.
saying, your understanding and the law as you interpret it and would support is that the President has the ability to put active duty troops on American streets even if governors object?
It's happened numerous times, and the answer to that is yes.
You would support that?
Well, it depends on the circumstances. I was involved in the LA riots and the Rodney King matter. We tried to use non-military forces. I sent 2,000 federal law enforcement officers out there in one day, but it was overwhelming, and the National Guard couldn't handle it. And Governor P. Wilson asked for federal troops.
And he asked for it then?
Yes.
That's a key distinction.
Or he approved the use of federal troops, but those troops were on standby as well.
Because I think a number of people would be surprised to hear, and it's been reported that you opposed sending in active duty troops on principle. You're saying you would support it.
As a last resort.
What is the last resort?
To restore law and order in a situation that is out of control and where life and property is endangered. And that's been done since the earliest days of the Republic. General Washington, the president, led the army into the field to suppress rebellion and an insurrection in Pennsylvania in the very first term of his administration.
So we can't be surprised when he now lashes out at peaceful protesters, calls them terrorists.
Trump called out early, use more force. I'm here available, use the National Guard. They don't want to do that because that means he's right. And that's why Mayor Garcetti was slow on calling the National Guard. He didn't want to call the National Guard. And then here's the other insult. He insults the intelligence of black voters thinking that, oh, I don't want to arrest these guys because it might upset black voters. I got news for you, Mayor and Governor and all these Democrats. Black voters want law and order, and the mayor doesn't get it. And you know what happens? The African-American community will suffer the most by them allowing them to burn these cities and these shops down because those are jobs that blacks will lose.
UCLA is now investigating a professor for the crime of reading Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail out loud. Meanwhile, also at UCLA, another professor called Gordon Klein is under police protection tonight. What did Gordon Klein do wrong? Well, when minority students asked to be exempted from final exams after George Floyd died, Klein refused. He said, everyone of all colors has to take the exam. UCLA immediately suspended him. Students threatened to kill him. Now, Klein has police cars outside of his house. All of this is happening right now in America. The question is anyone defending these guys, defending the right to give exams or to read Martin Luther King out loud? Well, probably not. No one's defending anyone anymore. It's every man for himself.
I would hope this opens up a whole conversation about the enemy that we have. It is not each other. It's Marxist, liberal Democrats who use my race to get power.
Alexander Katai is a Serbian soccer player who until the other day played professionally for the Galaxy in Los Angeles. Last week, Katai's wife posted criticism online of the looters she was watching wreck Minneapolis. A lot of people felt that way. Katai's wife wrote in Serbian, which she speaks, and yet someone noticed them anyway and then attacked her for writing them. She deleted the post very quickly, but it was too late. Now, we should be clear that her husband, the soccer player, may not even have known that she wrote the posts. His wife was in Chicago when she wrote them. He was practicing with his team in Los Angeles, but it didn't matter. Protesters dutifully arrived at the stadium to call for his firing. So the management of the LA Galaxy forced Katai to apologize for his wife and then to denounce her. Denounce his own wife. Then they made him endorse Black Lives Matter, which he did, and then they fired him anyway, and then they attacked him on his way out. For something he didn't even do and may not even have known about, that was written in a language almost nobody in America understands. That's what happened.
And so what a lot of folks are talking about when it comes into this movement is that they're asking for the same budget priorities that many affluent suburbs already have. And it may sound strange, but many affluent suburbs have essentially already begun pursuing a defunding of the police, in that they fund schools, they fund housing, and they fund healthcare more as their #1 priorities.
But why is it necessary to take the money from the police? I mean, I understand your argument, the argument you're making about expanding social services, investing in social services, but the research does show that more police on the street means less crime.
All night we watched these groups of people going from store to store. Many of them were already boarded up. They pulled the boards off and then broke through the glass. Some were not. They were going through. We saw people looting out of multiple stores, probably at least 6 or 7 stores on this very exclusive row of retail. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of police officers here. What we've been seeing is basically a cat and mouse game all night. The police officers have been here with a huge show of force, but they can't stop people because they don't know that they've necessarily been looting, and so they're waiting for somebody to do something. Police move on to the next block, and then someone does something. And so that's what we've been seeing basically all night, hundreds of people.
What do you say to your fellow Democrats who say the slogan defunding the police gets in the way of the argument you're making? You've even got the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Karen Bass, saying it's a distraction.
Yeah. Well, we can't necessarily, I don't think we can control what is happening right now in this moment, right? Our job as elected officials is to listen. And we can't control that everyone is going out in the street and saying Black Lives Matter.
Heartrending stories of small businesses in predominantly black neighborhoods that got looted. St. Louis, Philadelphia, Chicago, Minneapolis. The problem got so bad that black activist groups began arming themselves to protect the stores. And remember, these businesses seldom have insurance against looting or man-made disasters because the cost is high and the coverage is low. But amid the wreckage and debris of a looted Brooklyn deli came a very compelling voice that's gaining attention, an elderly and entrepreneurial African-American woman who offered this. Watch.
I worked here part-time. Plus, I'm a part owner of this store. You said Black Lives Matter. Why don't you choke me? I'm black. Look what you did to my store. Look at the things you've done. Good name. Look, the Black Lives Matter. We've been here all night cleaning up. All night cleaning. Tell me Black Lives Matter. You lied. You wanted to loot the store.
The most privileged in our society are using the most desperate in our society to seize power from everyone else. Got that? That's the nub of it. The most privileged are using the most desperate to seize power from the rest of us. They are not seeking racial justice. If they were seeking racial justice, they wouldn't be denouncing their fellow Americans for their race, which they are. It has nothing to do with it. What they are seeking is total control of the country. And it goes without saying that none of this has anything to do with George Floyd. Shame on those who pretended that it did, those who fell for the lie, and those who knew better but played along because they are cowards. There are many of those. You know who they are. And someday we will look back on all of them with contempt. Meanwhile, the many promoters of this chaos remain clear-eyed. They are not lying to themselves. They never do. They know exactly what's going on, and they know what they hope to achieve by it. With every night of rioting, they grow bolder. Now they are openly defending violence on television.
People are worried about the protesters and the looters. And it's just people who are frustrated.
They are frustrated, and they are angry, and they are out there, and they're upset. You shouldn't be taking televisions, but I can't tell people how to react to this.
I'm proud of the protests, and
I think it's part of the tradition of New York. The violence is bad, reprehensible, should be condemned, but it is not the overwhelming picture in New York.
Destroying property which can be replaced is not violence.
Too many see the protests as the problem. Please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
You can't believe it's happening to your country. But for the people you just saw, the real problem is that the rioting in some rare places is being stopped by police. And their aim is to fix that. They would like to eliminate all law enforcement for good. Today, Democrats in Dallas took down the statue of a Texas Ranger from the terminal at Love Field that had stood in the airport for more than 50 years. The Texas Rangers are cops, and cops must be removed even when they're made of bronze. Meanwhile, the Lego toy company has ceased marketing sets that contain plastic police officers. Apparently they're too dangerous for our children. And so on. So much of this going on right now. If it all seems like yet another episode of the silly and fleeting hysteria that sometimes grips our culture out of nowhere, usually in lulls in the news cycle, you should know that it's not that. This is entirely real. It is being pushed by serious people, and they are deadly serious about it. Last night, for example, Brian Fallon, who was the press secretary of the Hillary Clinton for President campaign in the last election cycle, tweeted, quote, "Defund the police."
This is Stephen Edgington for The Sun, and today I'm interviewing Brandon Tatum. Brandon Tatum is a former police officer and a conservative commentator. We're going to be talking about the Black Lives Matter protests, the death of George Floyd, and the idea of white privilege and whether we live in a racist society. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Are you a supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Am I a supporter?
Correct.
No, I'm not.
Why not?
Well, because I don't think that the intentions or the spirit behind Black Lives Matter is actually effective, and they're being genuine about what their approach is. I haven't seen not one legitimate result that have come from Black Lives Matter, the movement, or any of the activism that has came forth in America. And if you ask me, I think they've been more destructive, more counterproductive than they have been doing anything positive in America.
The actual phrase Black Lives Matter, I think pretty much everyone can agree with that, right? So is there a distinction between the phrase and the kind of goals of the movement and the people involved in the movement and what you were mentioning just there?
Yeah, to me, it seems like a racist or a prejudiced overtone to even suggest that Black Lives Matter. And the reason why is because everybody matters. You shouldn't isolate one group and say, let's emphasize that these individuals matter more than anybody else, or to highlight that. I get some of the idea behind it, that people may feel like black people are being held behind, or if that's their sentiment. I get it, but I think it does more harm by isolating one racial group and therefore leaving out others. And I'll tell you this, in America, if a white group were to say white lives matter, people will be open arms and have a problem with that, saying that this is racially biased. So I think just the title in and of itself, Black Lives Matter, I don't really think that they should have went down that path because it makes them look like they're racially prejudiced. But I think they should have said all lives matter, which is saying that black lives are just as equal to other lives, not necessarily that black lives are better or should be emphasized at a higher rate.
I suppose the argument that they would put back to you would be that obviously we've seen a series of black people being killed by cops. George Floyd is just the latest of many over the past few years and decades. Therefore, they're saying, well, look, there's clearly some people out there in America and all around the world who don't actually believe that black lives do matter, so that we've actually got to go and point out that actually, in fact, they do matter, and therefore, you know, we've got to go out and protest. So what would you say to that argument that, look, they're just pointing out that there's an injustice going on?
Yeah, I mean, we should look at facts. And if we were going to have a conversation at any point, we need to start from a point of being equal, treating everybody with respect, and then we can come to the table. It should not be one side bashing the other side, thinking that we're going to accomplish anything. Black Lives Matter as a organization or an approach, it comes across as disingenuous when you look at their arguments, because they're basing their arguments and evaluation on black lives. It appears to be only when a black person dies at the hands of police. When you look at the overwhelming majority of black lives being lost through abortion, being lost through bad health, heart disease, and other things, including black on black violence, they're MIA. They're not present. So it appears to be that their argument becomes disingenuous because they're not worried about all black lives. And just as an example, just recently, this past weekend in one city, in one state, and it's obviously one part of one city, we had 25 African American people killed over the weekend in Chicago, Illinois. I mean, that's more people killed in one weekend than have been killed when you look at respect to unarmed black people who have been killed by police officers in last year and this year combined. Actually, it's been double the police fatalities of unarmed black people in 2019 and 2020. So when you see things like that and you never hear Black Lives Matter even mention these victims' names, you become very suspicious of their motives.
We have yet another murder in this area identified as the child. 2 African American men dead at a place where they claim to be working for Black Lives Matter, but they're gone. They're dead now. And we've had multiple other incidents: assaults, rape, robbery, and shootings.
I'm a leader of this FTP movement. It means a lot of things. It can mean free the people. It can mean for the people. It can also mean fire to property. We're hoping de Blasio and Cuomo come on and talk to us and give the youth some direction. But if they don't, the next stop is the Diamond District. And gasoline, thanks to Trump, is awfully cheap.
The amazing thing is not just that he said that, though that's shocking enough. The amazing thing is that he said it on television live. He wasn't worried about being arrested. He's not like you at all. You're still not allowed to attend church services or go to big weddings. Too bad you're not friends with D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. You could do anything. Bowser has renamed a park near the White House Black Lives Matter Plaza, and nobody criticized her for it. MSNBC practically sent her flowers.
Having a mural, Black Lives Matter, in huge block letters across 3 blocks leading up to the White House. As I said to you on a Sunday, badass move that you made.
The Black Lives Matter mural is a representation of an expression of our saying no, but also identifying and claiming a part of our city that had been taken over by federal forces.
Mayor Bowser was buoyed and gratified by the support she received from her friends over on MSNBC, so she also had Black Lives Matter painted in enormous yellow letters on 16th Street in downtown D.C. Kind of a bold move if you think about it, making a street partisan. Imagine a big city mayor naming a major thoroughfare NRA Avenue or Planned Parenthood Boulevard. Think he would say something about it? It's impressive in a way, but Black Lives Matter wasn't satisfied by it, not even close. The D.C. chapter of the group released a statement attacking Mayor Bowser for not giving them complete control of the city's police department. Quote, "This is to appease white liberals while ignoring our demands. Black Lives Matter means defund the police." Got that? Black Lives Matter means defund the police. Oh, so that's what Black Lives Matter means. No one really explains that.
What we saw in Minneapolis by men who wear the same uniform that I wear is unacceptable. There's no excuse. It was murder. And it's intolerable. But what I will say is that it's not representative of every police officer in this country.
375 million interactions with the public every year. 375 million interactions. Overwhelmingly positive responses. Overwhelmingly positive responses. But I read in the papers all week, we all read in the papers, that in the black community, mothers are worried about their children getting home from school without being killed by a cop. What world are we living in? That doesn't happen. It does not happen. I am not Derek Chauvin. They are not him. He killed someone. We didn't. We are restrained. And you know what? I'm saying this to all the cops here. Because you know what? Everybody's trying to shame us. The legislators, the press, everybody's trying to shame us into being embarrassed about our profession. But you know what? This isn't stained by someone in Minneapolis. It's still got a shine on it. And so do theirs. So do theirs. Stop treating us like animals and thugs, and start treating us with some respect. That's what we're here today to say. We've been left out of the conversation. We've been vilified. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. Trying to make us embarrassed of our profession. 375 million interactions. Overwhelmingly positive. Nobody talks about all the police officers that were killed in the last week in the United States of America, and there were a number of them. We don't condone Minneapolis. We roundly reject what he did as disgusting. It's disgusting. It's not what we do. It's not what police officers do. Our legislators abandoned us. The press is vilifying us. Well, you know what, guys? I'm proud to be a cop. And I'm going to continue to be proud to be a cop until the day I retire. And that's all I have to say.
Rumors posted on social media that 2 black men had been shot by officers in St. Cloud, Minnesota. We all saw it up close, and it sparked rage, drawing a large crowd outside police headquarters overnight. The rumors were not true, and it quickly emerging after it was revealed that it was actually a police officer who was shot. It happened while the officer was trying to arrest an armed teenager. The officers on the scene did not fire back. They were able to subdue the teen and take him into custody. So, you know, you did just say you spoke to the officer about 15 minutes ago. 14-year veteran of the force, if I'm correct. And obviously he was shot on the hand. I know you said he's doing okay, but how is he feeling right now, and how serious is his injury?
Well, during the conversation, I could tell that he was in good spirits, got a long rehab ahead, and we're hoping that a full recovery and a quick return to duty is the outcome here. I can tell you how grateful we are, and morale is good at the St. Cloud PD. Our community has backed us, and we have their full support, and for that we are eternally grateful. As for the lie that went out over social media, we need to be very careful. We're in some very dangerous territory right now, and it is unfortunate that even when confronted with the truth, with the facts, which that group was before they attempted to storm our police department, they wanted no parts.
That's incredible that they even then they didn't want any parts of it. I mean, Chief, I want to ask you because you know, you come to this as a professional, but your personal story is important for people to know. You became a police officer after your home was firebombed. Your 2 children were inside, and the people who did it were never caught. And now you're the first black police chief of St. Cloud. How does that impact how you're leading right now? That experience, which is so terrifying and hard for so many to understand.
I think we're all products of our experiences and our upbringing. You know, I'm grateful that everything I needed to know to succeed in life, my mother and father taught me before I was 5 years old, and it's simply how you treat people. And so those values are what we try and embody, and that's the thing that we value at the St. Cloud Police Department. And again, I can't be more proud of the men and women who serve our community. I can't be more proud of our community. And the vast majority of police officers, make no mistake, are doing this job the right way for the right reasons. And we should not forget about them. If we continue to alienate them, we're going to have some very fine people and very fine officers walking away from this profession. And none of us want that.
Movement takes all kinds of gifts and talents, whether you are in the street, whether you are, you know, opening your purse, whether you are creating art, whether you are just giving your time with everyone. That's even everyone that's taking the time to tune in tonight. I just want to thank everyone who's choosing to be here in community in this moment in the pursuit of justice, because it's so important that we recognize and uplift exactly what you said, is that these are systemic problems. They do not go away by changing a tactic. They do not go away by banning a chokehold. They do not go away by tweaking $1 million in a budget. they come with wholesale change. That is what the word radical really means, by the way. It means the root, getting to the root of problems. And that word has just kind of been co-opted as though you just kind of I don't even know, some Looney Tune out here. But what it really means is that if you are radical, it means that you get to the root of problems, which is why I've never been offended and I embrace that term, because what it means that we believe that systemic problems require systemic solutions. And when we talk about what's going on, we're in it here in New York. Just clashes every night. Police are actively charging groups of peaceful protesters.
Let's show you video of something really quite remarkable that happened that we watched earlier at Washington Square Park. The chief of department of the NYPD, the highest ranking officer, took a knee with protest leaders after they helped, along with the police, defuse a situation in which some people were throwing bottles at cops. The protest leaders and the police joined forces and got those people to stop. The cops backed down and de-escalated. It was a very emotional scene when perhaps you could say the highest ranking police officer in the country took a knee with those protesters, hugged emotionally with them. Here's what he had to say to me just after that.
Feel fine, that's right. Because that's the first moment that we get this together, that us and everything that these cops have given their blood for, and the communities that we serve and they all love, can go back together and get those groups out of here from California, from all over this country, who are being paid to take this movement, which is a good movement, and turn it into violence against the men and women who love the communities. Get them out of here, throw them out of your protests, protest peacefully. Why would anyone break into a store in your neighborhood? Places that employ the people in this neighborhood. No reason for it. It has to end. Let New York show the country how this is done.
What's happening to this country? Why are Americans surrendering to violent mobs? Well, because they've been told they have to. Everything we're now watching, the looting, the arson, the killing, has a purpose. The purpose, we're told again and again, is to end racist police violence against African Americans. We are told that that is the single greatest scourge in this country.
For the past 400 years stemming from slavery, there has been a genocide of black people in this country.
I'm sick and tired of seeing black men and women be killed and nothing be done about it. We had a black man in the office, bro, they were still killing it, bro.
Stop killing us. It's chilling. And if you believe it and you're a decent person, you will be moved by it because it's awful. No American should ever be mistreated by those in authority, much less killed. The abuse of power is always and everywhere a sin, and it's increasingly common here. We should always work to end it. In this case, the death of a man at the hands of police in Minneapolis turned out to be a metaphor for abuse of power. That death has led to demands that we fire the nearly 700,000 police officers who work in the United States, and that we free the 1.5 million criminals who are now behind bars. In America, Joe Biden told us recently, quote, just the color of your skin puts your life at risk. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey strongly agreed with that. Quote, we have so many people in our country, Booker said yesterday, African American men, mostly unarmed, being murdered by police officers and no way of holding them accountable. So many people murdered by police officers, unarmed, says Cory Booker. You're hearing a lot of people in authority tell you that. Every day, every hour. One group of pro athletes just announced that, quote, it seems like every week a new tragedy unfolds before our very eyes where people are being killed by police violence. Each time we tweet, we pray, we mourn, only to repeat the cycle a few days later. End quote. In the words of Ben Crump, who's the lawyer representing George Floyd's family in Minneapolis, what we're witnessing here in America is, quote, genocide. Genocide. If you believed we were seeing genocide, then you might understand the riots now in progress. There's nothing worse than genocide. But is it happening? Is any of this true? We should find out. Facts matter. What exactly are the numbers? We found the numbers, and we're going to go through them with you in some detail tonight because it's worth it. Since 2015, the Washington Post has maintained a comprehensive database of fatal police shootings in this country. Last year, the Post logged a total of 1,004 killings. Of the 802 shootings in which the race of the police officer and the suspect was noted, 371 of those killed were white, 236 were black. The vast majority of those killed were not, in fact, unarmed. The vast majority were armed, and African-American suspects were significantly more likely to have a deadly weapon than white suspects. Yet more white suspects were killed. Overall, there were a total of precisely 10 cases in the United States last year, according to the Washington Post, in which unarmed African-Americans were fatally shot by the police. There were 9 men and 1 woman. Now, as we said, a lot is at stake. The country is at stake. So we want to take the time now to go through these case by case in the specifics. The first was a man called Chinara Feet. He was killed by a Knoxville police officer called Dylan Williams. According to Williams, Feet attacked him, choked him, and then used a taser on him, the suspect on the police officer, before the officer shot him. 5 eyewitnesses corroborated the officer's claim, and the officer was not charged. The second case concerns a man called Marcus McVeigh. He was, by any description, a career criminal from San Angelo, Texas. He'd been convicted of aggravated assault, assault on a public servant, and organized criminal activity. At the time he was killed, he was wanted on drug dealing charges. The Texas state trooper pulled him over. McVeigh fled in his car, then he fled on foot into the woods. There he fought with a trooper and was shot and killed. The officer was not charged in that case. Marzua Scott assaulted a shop employee. When a female police officer arrived and ordered the suspect toward her car, he instead charged her and knocked her to the ground. At that point, she shot and killed him. The entire incident was caught on body camera. The officer was not charged. Ryan Twyman was being approached by 2 LA County deputies when he backed into one of them with his vehicle. The deputy was caught in the car door. He and his partner opened fire. The deputies were not charged in that case. Melvin Watkins of East Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was shot by a deputy after he allegedly drove his car toward the deputy at high speed. The deputy was not charged. Isaiah Lewis, meanwhile, wasn't just unarmed. He was completely naked. Williams broke into a house and then attacked a police officer. The police tased Williams, but he kept coming at them and attacking. The officer shot him. They were not charged. Atiana Jefferson was shot by a Fort Worth deputy called Aaron Dean. A neighbor had called a non-emergency number after seeing Johnson's door open, thinking something might be wrong. Police arrived. Johnson saw them approach from a window and was holding a gun at the time. According to body camera footage, the officer shot Johnson within seconds. Jefferson, that officer, has been charged with homicide. Christopher Whitfield was shot and killed at a place called Ethel, Louisiana. He'd robbed a gas station. Deputy Glenn Sims said his gun discharged accidentally while grappling with Whitfield's. Sims, who is black himself, was not charged in that killing. Kevin Mason was shot by police during a multi-hour standoff. While Mason turned out not to have a gun, Mason claimed to have a gun, claimed to be armed, and vowed to kill police with it. They believed him. Mason had been in a shootout with police years before. And finally, the 10th case concerns Gregory Griffin. He was shot during a car chase. An officer called Giovanni Crespo claimed he saw someone pointing a gun at him. Later, a gun was in fact found inside the vehicle, and yet Officer Crespo was charged anyway with aggravated manslaughter. Those are the facts. That is the entire list from 2019, last year. 10 deaths. In 5 deaths, an officer was attacked just before the shooting occurred. That is not disputed. 1 allegedly was an accident. That leaves a total of 4 deaths during a pursuit or in a standoff. So out of 4, in 2 of those cases, in fully half, the officer was criminally charged. Is it possible that more of these officers should have been charged? Of course it's possible. Justice is not always served, that's for sure. But either way, this is a very small number in a country of 325 million people. This is not genocide. It's not even close to genocide. It is laughable to suggest it is. In fact, the number of police killings is dropping. In 2015, during Barack Obama's presidency, 38 unarmed black Americans and 32 whites were slain by police. Overall totals have fallen since then. They have fallen far more dramatically for African American men. Last year was the safest year for unarmed suspects since the Washington Post began tracking police shootings. It was the safest year for both white and black suspects. At the same time, this country remains a dangerous place for police officers. 48 of them were murdered in 2019, according to FBI data. That's more than the number of unarmed suspects killed of all races. One final number for you, because it matters. In 2018, 7,407 African Americans were murdered in the United States. If 2019 continues on a similar trajectory, and we hope it doesn't, but if it does, that would mean that for every unarmed African American shot to death in the United States by police, more than 700 were murdered by someone else, usually by someone they know. Again, those are the facts. They are not in dispute. Are African Americans being hunted, as Joy Reid recklessly claimed on MSNBC recently? Or is something else happening? Is our nation being ripped apart by a total and complete lie, a provable lie, a lie used by cynical media manipulators and unscrupulous politicians who understand that racial strife, race hatred, is their path to power, even if it destroys the country?
ALcHeMy, see all.
You have the facts now, and you can decide what's really going on.
I spoke to the heads of the sheriff department, the police department, and the state police down there, and they told us how their hearts were reeling. Their message is peace and coming together in the country. What's your message?
You don't believe that for 1 minute, do you?
That their message is?
Yeah.
That's what they said to me.
Okay.
Yeah, believe them.
Any protests over the deaths of these cops today in Baton Rouge?
I don't know that. I don't know that.
Any riots or protests over the police officers in Dallas, Texas?
What are you asking?
It's a pretty simple question.
I asked you what's your message to the people. Their message is one of peace. What is your message?
My message has been clear from day one 2 years ago. This anti-cop sentiment from this hateful ideology called Black Lives Matter has fueled this rage against the American police officer. I predicted this 2 years ago. So what I want to know,
okay, Sheriff.
do I want to know?
With all due respect, do you know that this
Divide and conquer.
Because of that?
Yes, I do.
As a law enforcement officer?
I've been watching this for 2 years. I predicted this. This anti-police rhetoric sweeping the country has turned out some hateful things inside of people that are now playing themselves out on the American police officer. I want to know, with all of the black-on-black violence in the United States of America, by the way, when the tragedies happened in Louisiana and Minnesota, you know that 21 black people were murdered across the United States? Was there any reporting on that?
There was a black officer who was killed today. But
was there any reporting on that?
Sheriff, please, let's just keep the vibe down. So I understand, and listen. I'm
looking at 3 dead cops this week,
Sheriff,
and I'm looking at 5 last year. You trying to tell me to keep it down?
Just please, please. We can keep it civil. So, because the message to people at home, I'm sure you want, is one of civility.
I wish, Don, I wish you had that message of civility
have a conversation
toward this hateful ideology. These purveyors of hate.
What my message is.
That's
what I
what
want
they
to say
do.
to you is,
these people preach
fire
and virtue in the name of.
Dude's keeping it real.
So in this Monday meeting
Don Lemon didn't like that.
with the president, when the defense secretary, who has now publicly said that he opposed using the Insurrection Act, you said what to the president?
I don't think the Secretary of Defense said he opposed it. I think he said that it was a last resort. He didn't think it was necessary. I think we all agree that it's a last resort, but it's ultimately the president's decision. The reporting is completely false on this.
Do you believe there is systemic racism in law enforcement?
I think there's racism in the United States still, but I don't think that the law enforcement system is systemically racist. I understand the distrust, however, of the African American community given the history in this country. I think we have to recognize that for most of our history, our institutions were explicitly racist. They denied equal rights to African Americans.
Where are they now?
First under slavery, then under Jim Crow. I think since the abolition of Jim Crow laws, which really didn't get struck down completely until the 1960s, I think since that time, and so as a result of that, the civil rights movement was largely battling these institutions that were imposing racism. Since the 1960s, I think we've been in a phase of reforming our institutions and making sure that they're in sync with our laws and aren't fighting a rearguard action to impose inequities.
And you think that's working?
I think the reform is a difficult task, but I think it is working and progress has been made. I think one of the best examples is the military. The military used to be explicitly racist institution, and now I think it's in the vanguard of bringing the races together and providing equal opportunity. I think law enforcement has been going through the same process, and while it's a difficult process, and while law enforcement is not monolithic in this country, we have 50 states on a lot of local jurisdictions, it's undeniable that progress is being made. We have a generation of police leaders in this country, many of whom are now African American in our major cities, who are firmly committed to equal justice and to fair policing.
Let me ask you this. Do we know that generally the American law enforcement officers are racist? Do we know this?
Go on.
I ask a question.
Do I know American general law enforcement are racist? I don't think anyone is accusing. If you're insinuating that people are accusing or saying that law enforcement across this country as a whole are racist, then your assumption is wrong.
First of all, this whole anti-police rhetoric is based on a lie. There is no data, and you know this, there is no data, there is no research that proves any of that nonsense. None. Even
you'd have to be more specific about what data and what nonsense you're talking about.
That law enforcement officers treat black males different than white males in policing in these urban
There
settings.
is data that's...
There is not data.
Call him out.
The president spoke about it. Cedric Alexander, who is a law
president has
enforcement
been
officer.
lying about it. He said it again the other day when he said black males are 2 times more likely to be shot by a law enforcement officer than white males. Don, that is a lie.
That is not a lie.
It is a lie.
Show me. Research.
Show me.
The research
Show
that
it to
we
me.
have.
Calling him out on the fake news channels.
The Washington Post debunked that nonsense.
There's also research.
He also said this stuff.
There's also research.
He continues.
A Harvard professor that also showed that black people are treated more aggressively by police officers.
No, you are
than other
wrong in your interpretation of that Harvard study, because I read the study. That's not what he said. He said he was surprised to find
that in shootings of the most severe in shootings that he found no evidence that there was a difference. Also, it should be noted that that study was a very small sampling of police departments across the country. Many people did not find it credible, but it is also interesting that in that research, he found that blacks were treated differently when it came to aggressive policing, but for the most egregious shootings, he found no difference. That's what that study showed.
Well, based on what? Just generally? Are we talking about high crime areas? Are we talking about police officers being under attack? Because let's go back to where this whole thing started in Ferguson, Missouri. The lie was hands up, don't shoot.
Lumping a whole bunch of things into one. If we can do one specific
That's where this whole phony movement started. It started out as hands up, don't shoot.
You're talking about Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Okay. So if you want to you would need to speak to someone.
Puppet Master is behind all of this. The alchemists already know, Don.
Perpetrated a fraud on the American people. That's up to Black Lives Matter. That's not me. I'm neither
It's
a
up to the
member of
Puppet
Black Lives
Master,
Matter.
Don.
I'm either a supporter or someone who doesn't support them. I simply report on Black Lives Matter.
Do you condemn the anti-police rhetoric coming from this hateful ideology?
As a journalist sitting here on television, I don't have to condemn anyone, anything. That is something that you should ask other people around the country.
I condemn
their jobs to condemn
just
that.
like I condemn the hateful ideology out of groups like the KKK. All right? I condemn it. There is no place in American discourse for that sort of vile, vitriolic hate coming out of this ideology. This has fueled and fanned the flames of this anger
This is
toward
the
the American
Soros
police officers.
machine.
There's only one group in America, one time, that truly cares about the lives of black people in these urban ghettos, and it's the American police officer who goes down there on a daily basis, puts their life on the line to protect who? Black people. So when you say we just want to have a
Put their lives
conversation,
on the line to affect,
let's
to protect
have a
all
conversation about the black-on-black crime, which kills more black males, which is more of a threat to any black male in the United States than a law enforcement officer.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you about some of the events of the week. On Monday, Lafayette Park was cleared of protesters. You've spoken about this. The federal agents who were there reported to you. Did you think it was appropriate for them to use smoke bombs, tear gas, pepper balls, projectiles at what appeared to be peaceful protesters?
They're not peaceful protesters, and that's one of the big lies that the media seems to be perpetuating.
3 of my
I
CBS
smell
colleagues were there to talk to
Soros.
them. They did not hear warnings. They did not see
There were
those
three
protesters
warnings. There were three
throwing
warnings given,
anything.
but let's get back to why we took that action. On Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, okay, there were violent riots at Lafayette Park, where the park police were under constant attack at the behind their bike rack fences. They were battling over the fences. They were trying to get entry. They were throwing bricks and an inflammable liquid at the police. 1/5 of there have been 750 officers hurt in the last week. 1/5 of those have been in Washington, D.C. Most of those have been federal officers at Lafayette Park. On Sunday, things reached a crescendo. The officers were pummeled with bricks. Crowbars were used to pry up the pavers at the park, and they were hurled at police. There were fires set in not only St. John's Church, but a historic building at Lafayette was burned down.
These were things that looters did.
Not looters. These were the violent rioters who were dominated Lafayette Park.
But when I'm
they
asking
broke
about
into the
this on
Treasury
Monday,
Department.
when it was a peaceful protest.
Let me get to this, because this has been totally obscured by the media. They broke into the Treasury Department, and they were injuring police.
This stuff has already been debunked.
Sure. That's a different conversation.
Every
One
time,
that many people
every
don't-
time.
Don's like, we
you
can't
don't
have that on
a
air.
response to something I
It's
say,
not
you
that,
say
it's not that I don't have a response to you, is that we're having two different conversations. I'm talking about, I'm asking the questions here, you're answering the questions by asking questions about some other subject that we're not discussing.
We're talking
is
about
not a
this hateful
conversation.
ideology called Black Lives Matter.
There were projectiles being hurled at the police, and at that point, it was not to respond.
On Monday, you're saying there were
On Monday.
projectiles.
Yes, they
Because,
were.
as I'm saying, 3 of my colleagues were there.
Yeah.
They did not see projectiles being thrown.
I was there.
When
I
that
was there.
happened.
They were thrown. I saw them thrown.
And you believe that what the park police did, using tear gas and projectiles, was appropriate?
Here's what the media is missing. This was not an operation to respond to that particular crowd. It was an operation to move the perimeter 1 block.
And the methods they used, you think, were appropriate? Is that
When
what
they
you're
met
saying?
resistance, yes. They announced 3 times. They didn't move. By the way, there was no tear gas used. The tear gas was used Sunday when they had to clear 8th Street to allow the fire department to come in to save St. John's Church. That's when tear gas was used.
They were chemical irritants, the park
No, they were not
police
chemical
said.
irritants. Pepper spray is not a chemical irritant. It's not chemical.
Pepper spray, you're saying, is
Pepper
what was
balls.
used.
Pepper balls.
Right. And you believe that was appropriate?
The protesters that Trump tried to characterize as thugs were the ones he literally ordered our military to clear from the square in front of the White House.
I wanted to ask you actually specifically about that and the fact that he used tear gas on the protesters.
They were totally peaceful protesters. And what he was trying to do, as he often does, is to mischaracterize them and their behavior and their goals and lump them in with the tiny, tiny minority of people who took advantage of a tragic moment to loot and to steal and to vandalize. A tiny, tiny percentage.
I
For
smell
many of us,
Soros,
this has been one
puppet.
of the saddest, most painful weeks in memory. Depressing doesn't even begin to describe it. We have watched as mobs of violent cretins have burned our cities, defaced our monuments, beaten old women in the street, shot police officers, and stolen everything in sight, stealing everything. How many innocent Americans have these people hurt? How many have they murdered? We don't know that number, but it's the country itself that so many of us worry about at this point. After we've watched what's happened over the last week, how do we put the society back together? Can we? We don't know that either. If you're grieving for America tonight, you are not alone. Millions feel the same way you do. So many of our leaders, by contrast, are not grieving. They seem exhilarated. They feel nothing as our nation descends into anarchy. They see chaos instead as an opportunity, a chance to solidify their control, to increase their market share, to win elections. They have no interest in talking about the details of what is actually happening out there on our streets. In fact, they're hiding those details. They're demanding that you forget what you saw. Don't forget it. Remember all of it, every bit, because it's proof of who they are.
In an environment where the broader debate is about heavy-handed use of force and law enforcement, was that the right message for Americans to be receiving?
Well, the message is sometimes communicated by the media. I didn't see any video being played on the media of what was happening Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. All I heard was comments about how peaceful the protesters were. I didn't hear about the fact that there were 150 law enforcement officers injured and many taken to the hospital with concussions. It wasn't a peaceful protest. We had to get control over Lafayette Park, and we had to do it as soon as we were able to do that.
But you understand how these events appear connected.
Well, it's the job of the media to tell the truth. They were not
Well, this
connected.
is what I'm asking you.
That's what you're talking about. Listen, I understand that you're very. I understand it's a very stressful time for you.
These individuals,
and Sheriff, we appreciate you coming on.
they preach vile and vitriol in the name of virtue.
Thank you, Sheriff. We appreciate it.
All right, Alchemist. Thanks for coming in.